So my name is Sue Jones, for anyone who's not met me before. I'm Executive Head of Education at the Institute, and I'm really pleased to be joined today by Tahmina and Jim, who've done all of the support hubs this year with me. And it's really Tahmina's baby, the support hub. So really pleased that Tahmina is on board for all of them. And we've got an external person with us today called Heena, who's really experienced in all things EDI. And she's going to help us deliver the session and also help us to answer some questions at the end as well. So please do ask anything you're unsure about or you'd like to have more information, just let us know. So just a quick overview of what we're going to do in the session today, and then I'm going to hand over to Jim to do a couple of interactive polls. So the idea with the session today is to go over some things that we've already done at the Institute around equality, diversity and inclusion, let you know about the working group that we formed last summer and some of the work that's been going on and activities from the EDI working group, and also talk about some of the things that we should be doing things around EDI anyway, but we have a couple of things that are going to give us hopefully some momentum this year to make sure it's embedded both in taught programmes at universities and also within the workplace because of the standards of proficiency update. So I'll talk about those. And then Heena will do some slides for a workshop and discussion session at the end around some equality, diversity terms, what inclusion is, lots and lots of different things that we're hoping you're going to find helpful.
So the Diversity and Inclusion Progression Framework, it's a tool for professional bodies to assess and monitor the progress on diversity and inclusion. And it was developed in collaboration with the Royal Academy of Engineering. And the IBMS have completed this framework, so the benchmarking exercise twice, once in 2017 and the last time was in 2021. The benchmarking report is available on the IBMS website if anyone is interested in finding out more of the results. I will go through the latest report with you now, which is the next slide, please, Sue. So some of the areas that we assessed as part of this benchmarking exercise were the governance and leadership, membership and professional registration, meetings, conferences and events, education, training and exams, accreditation of education and training, prizes, awards and grants, communication and marketing, outreach and engagement, employment and monitoring and measuring. So the next slide actually shows us the results of the benchmarking exercise. So the IBMS assessed themselves based on the data that was available. So I know it looks worse than it actually is, but that's just because the IBMS went off using sort of UCAS approach. So if there was limited evidence for some of these areas, the scores were quite low. So it might be that the processes are in place, but we just don't have the data to kind of evidence that and document it. So we are aware now that the collection of data is necessary for us to progress and improve the scores that are visible on this slide. And the membership and marketing team are working on how they can collect this data, either through the new website or through membership surveys. Next slide, please, Sue. So from the benchmarking exercise, these were some of the strengths that were highlighted. So the membership and registrant population, they're representative of women with figures that are significantly higher than both the overall and scientific bodies benchmarks. The self-assessment indicates that membership and registration policies are clear and transparent, and they're readily available on the IBMS website. The IBMS Code of Conduct specifically addresses discrimination, and we are networking with stakeholders on diversity and inclusion issues. And IBMS are actually gaining confidence in communicating its commitment to diversity and inclusion externally. The teams that are responsible for producing the materials, they understand the diversity of the membership and the specific campaigns that have been undertaken to give minority members the opportunity to share experiences to a wider audience. Next slide, please, Sue. But some of the areas for development include some of these. So we need to expand the focus on diversity and inclusion in governance and leadership so that we can build a comprehensive strategy and an action plan. We need to be doing more to kind of effectively embed some of this work into the IBMS, such as building strategic goals, plans and measures that are underpinned by clear accountability and governance. One of the clear areas for development is on data gathering and use. So there is limited data, which we're aware of, and some ad hoc surveys. So we're looking at continuing to develop the systems, the processes and relationships that are needed to gather, analyse and make use of the diversity and inclusion data. And there was also limited evidence of activity to build diversity and inclusion within the workforce in the Institute. So We have gone on to launch an EDI working group, which we launched last year in August. And we have 2 representatives from the IBMS, so Linda Rigby and Sue Jones, who's here with us today, and then Colin Mudd, who is deputy for leading on this. And then we have in the table, you can see the EDI representatives on the left-hand side and which region they're representing. So if you need to get in touch with anyone or have any ideas on what we can be doing to improve sort of EDI, you can get in touch with the council members that are listed in the middle column here. Next slide, please, Sue. Thank you. So we have done quite a bit of work since we've launched the EDI group. We've been engaging with the different regions and branches, and we've been organising events and roadshows. Today is an example of this work, but there have been quite a few. So we did a Manchester branch EDI event in January, and then we've recently done a Yorkshire and Northern Ireland one. London region also did an EDI event. We've identified content for each issue of the Biomedical Sciences magazine, which covers a range of areas, such as disability awareness, menopause. We have polycystic ovary syndrome written by one of our EDI group members as well as things like autism and neurodiversity. We've had case studies and articles that were promoted throughout Black History Month. We're looking at sort of removing barriers to diversity in education and training, reviewing the boards and examinations. Sue's also involved in the EDI work, so we are already having conversations in this area. Looking at how we can improve career progression for underrepresented members. Also looking at updating the EDI policy. We've been talking about including EDI sessions at the IBMS Congress, such as decolonising the curriculum, gender, neurodiversity. We did also receive feedback after the last Congress around the diversity of exhibitors, and we have taken this on board. So there is an EDI statement now, which we include when we're inviting exhibitors to the Congress. And we're also aiming to raise awareness on disabilities this year as well. So recently we met with a guest speaker from the University of East Anglia. She's currently doing a project called Access All Area in lab projects, and some of the findings were that there is poor access to buildings, the knowledge around accessibility for those who have disabilities are also quite poor. Some of the web pages and conferences as well, when they're advertised, are inaccessible. There's lack of accessibility in terms of mobility and sensory access and toilets, as well as things like fire safety. So these are areas that we are looking at and working with others on projects. Next slide, please. Thank you. Future events that we've got planned for the rest of the year, some examples I've listed on this slide. Things like Men's Health Week, we've got Pride coming up next month, breast cancer awareness, Black History Month, Dyslexia Awareness Week, International Day of Persons with Disabilities, and World AIDS Day. So these are just a few examples of things that we've got planned. But in the slide earlier, we had a couple of pictures, you know, of some of us that took part on things like International Women's Day, as well as World Hearing Day. So do look out for those articles if you're interested. We do have a couple of short videos planned as well for the year. And I'll hand you over to Sue now for the next slides. Thank you, Sue.
EDI is something that's really important. You can see lots of work already going on from the working group that's being led by that working group and informing all the things that we're doing. But there are also some external things that are happening this year that give us a real chance for really positive change and some momentum to make that happen. So I just wanted to highlight two of them, just in case people are not familiar with them. So the first one is focused on degree programs. So the degree programs that we will accredit from the Institute are ones that are benchmarked against the Subject Benchmark Statement from the QAA, which is shown here. And I've put a link at the bottom of the slides. If you haven't seen it, it gives you a link to go directly to it, and we'll share the slides after the event. It tells you very clearly the difference between what biomedical science singular is and what biomedical sciences plural is. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the accredited degrees and the differences in the new benchmark statement compared to the old one. So the IBMS accredits certain degree programs, both BSc and MSc, around the UK, and we also have some international provision. In the UK, we've got around 56 universities at the moment that have an accredited program with us. And what we do when we accredit those programs is we check the curricula that they're teaching against the QAA Subject Benchmark Statement. So as I've just said, we've tried to make it much clearer that the singular biomedical science is IBMS accredited, and the biomedical sciences plural as a name is normally not accredited by the Institute, and made it clear what the difference in curricula is. The main bits of the curriculum have stayed the same. The clinical pathology specialisms haven't changed very much. We've updated them very slightly, but we have added in 2 new things, which are point of care testing and quality management. So the expectation is students who are studying a degree that's accredited by the Institute will have an understanding of point of care testing and quality management when they leave. And a lot of the information which they're going to cover in their degree has been informed by the employability survey that Tahmina did with Martin, that we put in the magazine last August, if anybody wants to go back and have a look at that.
So in the benchmark statement, we made a strong statement that we expect everybody to be able to show that they have a commitment to equity, diversity and inclusion. And what we've said is that there should be intentional support for diverse student cohorts, and that we acknowledge everybody who's involved in teaching students that equality and diversity are interdependent. We also have said that we expect anybody who's running one of these programs to promote the equity of opportunities for all, and consider in their program design and development that they are valuing and harnessing the differences in the students, and everyone is treated with dignity and respect. So we've put some quite strong statements in about how we expect people to actually set up their programs and support students as they go through the program as well. The next thing I'm sure you're aware of, if you're working in a laboratory or you're going to do a placement, is the standards of proficiency have been updated for this year. So the HCPC updated the standards last year, and they'll be coming into effect on the 1st of September in 2023. And what's important to note is that the new standards have wording which means they are now much more about how you demonstrate that you are doing that thing, not that you've been to a course and you have an understanding of the words or you've got some knowledge because you went to something. It's about how you actively implement that thing in your practice. So again, at the bottom of the slide, I've put a link in, which is a link to the new standards if anybody hasn't seen it yet. The important thing for today is that the equality, diversity and inclusion, which is the word in the HCPC use, that section has been significantly expanded. So there used to be 3 standards of proficiency that were clearly focused on EDI. There are now 15 different standards which are focused on EDI. So you can see there's a much bigger emphasis, and it will be an expectation that people who are already registrants can demonstrate their commitment to EDI in their behaviours, but also people who are being trained can also demonstrate that not only do they know what it is, they actively demonstrate it in the way that they commit to doing their practice. So I just wanted to highlight some of them for you, just so that you can see. So I haven't put all of the new standards on, but under standards 2, you can see 2.5 and 2.6 are very clearly focused on EDI and respecting the rights of others, and to understand relationships with different people and having them based on mutual respect and trust. Under number 5, again, these are much squarely focused on equality, diversity and inclusion. So again, I've put them all, and I'm not going to read through them all, but number 5 is where there is quite clearly a focus on EDI. So anyone who is doing their training, or anyone who's already registered as a biomedical scientist, will need to evidence all of these things under number 5. So they need to respond appropriately to the needs of different groups of people, and to understand that different groups of people may be needing different support, different interaction, and to have an understanding and commitment to working out how to work better with people if they have differences to themselves. So understanding cultural differences, understanding what intersectionality is, understanding what protected characteristics are, not just because they're in law, but because it's an important part of being an effective practitioner. So there's a need to understand what the law says, but there is an equally important need to apply it in everyday practice. And then again, just continuing with the number 5, standards of proficiency. Again, I'm not going to go through them all, but you can see there's very clear information about making sure that if you have any biases which are conscious or unconscious, you don't bring that into your own practice, that you understand that there's a need to make reasonable adjustments for others, and you support them in making those to allow them to practice effectively. To recognise characteristics and consequences if people are feeling excluded, if there are barriers to them feeling included in what's going on, to be able to recognise that and to be able to act on that. And also to challenge any barriers. So instead of just being a bystander and seeing that there's something wrong, actually feeling empowered and able to challenge if that is the case. And then recognising that with regard to EDI, that needs to be embedded in everything that they do. It's not just about the numbers of the standards that we've put in that section in the module that people are doing. It's also about actually applying that in your practice, in your everyday work as well. So where are we at? We're finalising the wording. People are asking me a lot now, can we see it? Can we see the updated one? The registration portfolio is almost finished. but we need to update the guidance documents and everything else that goes with it. So we're just finalising those in the next few weeks. The new standards of proficiency have been updated and have been released for quite some time now, and they come into effect on the 1st of September. This will also affect the equivalence route to registration for biomedical scientists, so I'll be looking at that paperwork as well. We've got a resource hub that's being planned for trainers and verifiers, because we know that these changes to the standards are going to be something that people would like more help with. And just to point out, there are some HCPC webinars as well around the new standards. And today's support hub is also aimed at helping people to get ready to understand what the new standards are, and with particular areas we thought people might need some support with. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. This should be Heena's bit. So what I'll do is I'll mute on Jim's laptop as well, Heena, if you're good to go, and I'll keep looking in the opposite direction to move on the slides on the screen.
Thanks, Sue. So hi everyone. Over the coming slides, I'll be going through some EDI concepts and hopefully giving everyone a little bit of food for thought to take away and reflect on after the session today. It is an introductory level, so you may have come across some of these bits of information before. Anything that you haven't come across before, I definitely encourage you to go away and have a further look and see whether there's any elements of what we'll be talking through today that you can apply to your day-to-day life as well. A little bit of background on myself before I get started. So I have a background in communications and stakeholder management, and in my career I often found that there were barriers I was facing that other colleagues perhaps wasn't. I was sometimes the only female at the level of seniority that I was at, the only ethnic minority, so the only Indian person. And I realised that this was an experience that people were facing in all different types of industries and sectors. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I took the decision to completely change career paths and look at doing something that would add value from an equality, diversity and inclusion perspective. And here I am today speaking to you all, and I've spoken to Sue previously on sessions that I've delivered on race equality as well at another organisation. So hopefully there will be some value and insight that you can take away from the session today, and something that we can continue to build on. So if I can just have the next slide, thank you. The first thing that I'd like to get everyone to have a think about is what you feel equality of opportunity means. So what, from the definitions that are on screen in front of you, which one closer reflects what you think equality of opportunity is. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to have a read through, and then I will tell you which one is the correct one. So hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at the different options on the screen. I can see some people popping in the Q&A box what they feel the right answer is. Sue, could I have the next slide, please? Awesome. So yeah, the correct definition is about making sure everyone gets treated fairly. Treating everybody the same doesn't necessarily give them the same experience, because they may have different needs, different sort of preferences, different experiences. So it's about making sure that regardless of somebody's background or preferences or lifestyle, that they get a fair opportunity at something, essentially. So yeah, I can see that there was some 6s in the Q&A box as well, so well done to everyone that got that correct. My voice has started to go, so apologies, I'll just have some water. If I could have the next slide please, Sue. So just to build on that and have a think about diversity and inclusion. So I know that in the poll at the start of this, we asked what people felt in terms of different terms around diversity and inclusion, and if people knew the difference between excuse me, between them. So diversity and inclusion are about giving value to every human being, no matter what differences they might have. If I can have the next slide, please, Sue. And equality is about creating a level playing field. So when we go back to that definition of equality of opportunity, it's about treating everybody fairly. It's about creating that level playing field. So it might be that something needs an adjustment making so that they have an equal access, an opportunity to apply for some funding or to apply to be part of a particular team or whatever it might be. And it's about being willing to make those changes and make those adjustments to make sure that they have that access and opportunity to take part and to apply in the first place, I guess. Something else that was asked in the survey, the poll questions at the start, was around the difference between equality and equity. And on the next slide, there's a graphic which some of you may have come across before, but it talks about, so for example, on the image on the left, you've got 3 people who were all given a box to stand on. They've all given the same treatment to hopefully get them to see the view of what's happening on the playing field. It's obviously not an equal experience for them. There isn't that equality of opportunity there for them. They don't have that level playing field on which to be able to look over the fence and view what's happening in front of them. The image on the right depicts what equity would bring to that situation. So everybody is able to look over the fence, see what's happening, and have a view on what's going on. To demonstrate that a little bit further on the next slide, I've got a graphic that kind of tries to bring everything together in one analogy, which isn't always easy to do, but equality is giving everybody a pair of shoes. Diversity is everyone getting a different pair of shoes that suits their personality, their preferences. Equity is about getting a pair of shoes that fits. Acceptance is understanding that we'll all have a different favourite type of shoe or different kind of shoe that we want to wear. And belonging, and it always makes me laugh that there's Crocs on this picture, because that's one of those things where there's a bit of a sort of love-hate relationship with them across my social circle. But belonging is understanding that you can wear whatever shoes you want without fear of being judged. So if you want to wear Crocs, then go ahead and wear Crocs. So hopefully this kind of explains, in the context of EDI, how each of the different things can work together, what each of the different areas mean. When it comes to equality, diversity and inclusion, it's all underpinned by legislation. So I'm hopeful that a lot of you will have come across the Equality Act before, but essentially this pulls together lots of different legislation into one single act. And the aim of that is to advance equality of opportunity for all. And it protects people with protected characteristics from being discriminated in different situations. And that's both within a professional environment and sort of normal everyday life. The 9 protected characteristics are age, disability, sex, gender reassignment, race, religion or belief, sexual orientation, marriage or civil partnership, and pregnancy and maternity. And when I often talk about protected characteristics or sessions similar to the sessions that we're talking through today, I will always get somebody that will say to me, "Oh, this doesn't apply to me. You know, I've never really faced adversity or challenge, or you know, it's not something that I need to be worried about or need to be mindful of." And ultimately, what I say to them is, at least 3 or 4 of the characteristics that are protected under the Equality Act are relatable to everyone. We all have an age, we all have a gender or a sex, we all sort of have you know, ability, or you know, in that sort of a sense. We all have a sexual orientation. You know, there's elements of the protected characteristics that do apply to everybody. So it is something that people need to be mindful of from the perspective of their own personal experience, but also how they can support others to make sure that they get a level playing field when it comes to different opportunities. And to take that a level further and add another layer of complexity to it, there is intersectionality. So essentially, the quote that's on screen here there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. They're words spoken by Audre Lorde, who's a noted prose writer, poet and civil rights activist. And it captures the essence of what intersectionality is. It's impossible to say that everybody who, you know, identifies as being part of the LGBT plus community has the same experience, because that's not a reality. So essentially with intersectionality, we talk about fighting discrimination within discrimination, tackling inequalities within inequalities, and protecting minorities within minorities. So the next slide has a bit of a spectrum image on there, and it looks at the kind of different areas of sort of society and the different types of characteristics, and the fact that, you know, it's impossible to say that everybody with one particular race has the same experience to somebody else from that same race, because one person will relate to different characteristics and different sort of areas of society. So we all have our own unique experiences of what discrimination is, what privilege we might have, or what privilege people might hold over us. So it's really important to consider, when doing any type of work around equality, diversity and inclusion, that there will be groups within the protected groups that will have different experiences. So just something for people to kind of have a think about. And I know intersectionality is not necessarily as widely spoken about as some of the other sort of equality, diversity and inclusion concepts, but I think it's one of those that holds the most power, I guess, in instilling positive change when you start to think about the experiences of things at an individual level rather than something that's race related, something that's gender related. It's about trying to get into the detail of that. But yeah, just something for everyone to hopefully have a think about if you've not come across intersectionality before, to definitely do some further reading and see how it might impact your sort of own sort of body of work and the things that you might be involved with in the organisation. Great. I don't even have to ask, these already on it with the slides. So the next thing that I want to talk through, it kind of links to the intersectionality and the other terms that we've been talking about, is bias. So that's an inclination or prejudice for or against one person or group, and it's usually considered to be in the capacity of being unfair. So there are different types of biases that exist within any kind of organisation or community or culture, I guess, and it's really important to think about those biases, see how they might be impacting situations, and try and find ways to mitigate and overcome them. So on the next slide, I've got just some common types of biases that you might come across in the workplace. I won't talk through all of them. I think the slides will be shared after the session, so feel free to have a look through. But a couple of the ones that I think are most common, affinity bias. So this is also called mini-me syndrome, where you're naturally gravitating towards somebody that is similar to yourself. And this is something that's usually really prevalent within recruitment situations, where you might be interviewing somebody and, you know, you might be into the same university, you might have grown up in the same sort of area, so you automatically build that affinity with somebody because you have some sort of shared lived experience. Gender bias, so preferring one gender over the other, or assuming that one gender is better at a role than another. There's halo and horns effect, so where you, the halo effect is where you think more highly about somebody once you learn something about them that's quite impressive. So if you know that somebody has won an award or run a marathon or done something that is seen to be, you know, a really big achievement, and then that clouds your entire judgment of that person. And then the opposite of that is if you learn something less favourable about somebody, and then that then negatively impacts your view of that person as well. So the slide here has kind of got, not all of them, there's definitely more types of biases in the workplace and in society, as I said, but it kind of goes to show that there are things at play that might be impacting decisions and processes, and things that are happening that at sort of first look everything seems like it's just done the way it's done because that's how it's always been done. But when you look back and sort of see what may have driven certain decisions, or if you are coming up to a phase in your sort of job roles where you may be doing some recruitment, or you're looking at reviewing applications for funding or scholarships or whatever it might be, have a think about the process in which those decisions are being made and whether any of these types of biases might be impacting those decisions. And there's a whole training session that I can deliver on ways to mitigate against those different types of bias. But the first stage to that is just accepting that there is bias in the process and there's something that needs to happen as part of that. And I think the standards that Sue has just spoken through will hopefully start to trigger some conversations and be an opportunity to review if there are opportunities to bring in some EDI related work into the different areas. And there might be things that are already in place that are mitigating against bias, which is great. There may be other areas where more work can be done. So I think it's an important thing to kind of think about the biases that are at play. One type of bias that I do want to go into a bit more detail about is unconscious bias. And this is something that is a really important discussion topic. And again, there's a whole different 2-hour training session that I could do on this, but I have 2 slides, so I'll try and keep it brief. But whether the bias is related to the protected characteristics, the unconscious bias is something that we are totally unaware of, but we act upon it. So regardless of whether it's related to someone's age, gender, disability, or other sort of formal protected characteristic, or any point of difference, unconscious bias is something that does impact how we react to a situation, how we might judge or assess somebody. It has a massive impact on decision making in the workplace, in your own personal life, who you choose to be friends with and other aspects of things like that. We tend to process someone's characteristics, so whether they have a disability or not, their size, their age, their looks, without knowing that we've even done it. And we then often sort of assign characteristics from stereotypes and generalizations to that. So an example might be tattoos. If somebody is seen to be younger than the role that they're playing, for example. I've been in a lot of education settings where colleagues have been mistaken for students because they do look younger, and then people have an assumption on their role within the organisation and that sort of thing. Bias, whether conscious or unconscious, exists in all of us, and we all have the power to overcome them. But first, you have to take the step to identify what they are and then learn to mitigate and overcome them. So one of the ways in which you can assess any biases that you might have is something called an implicit association test. So I don't know whether anyone's come across this before, but there's something called Project Implicit. So Project Implicit is a non-profit organisation, an international collaborative network of researchers who are investigating implicit social cognition, or thoughts and feelings that are largely outside of conscious awareness and control. So things that might be happening in our brain that we're not necessarily acting upon consciously. The implicit association test measures things like attitudes and beliefs that people may be unwilling or unable to report. It also looks at associations between different types of characteristics and different types of stereotypes, and then how that impacts bias in the decisions that are made. I can share the link to the Project Implicit website where you can take an implicit association test. The slide here just shows some results from some global IAT tests. So from a gender perspective, 76% more readily associate males with career and females with family. Gender from a science perspective, 70% more readily associate male with science and female with arts. From a race perspective, 75% have an implicit preference for white people over black people. And then from a disability perspective, 76% have an implicit preference for able-bodied people. There's also a video that I sometimes show within unconscious bias training that's around, it's a group of school children, and I'll try and find the video and share it with Sue afterwards. But they're all told to draw a surgeon, a pilot, and an astronaut, I think it is. And a majority of the students, pupils in this primary school, will draw males in those positions. And then the teacher will say to them, do you want to meet a surgeon, a pilot, and an astronaut? And 3 women walk into the room, and the looks on these school children's faces, because they're not expecting them to be women, just shows how, you know, we are programmed in a way to kind of make certain assumptions and judgments on things. And it's really powerful to acknowledge that and then find ways in which they can be mitigated against. Could I have the next slide, please? So just building on that again, so sometimes when we have unconscious sort of reactions and sort of decisions made about things, it can lead to certain behaviours. One of those behaviours can be called a micro-incivility, or sometimes called a microaggression. So these are daily commonplace behaviours or aspects of an environment which signal to somebody, whether intentional or unintentional, that they don't belong or they're not welcome. Some examples of the micro-incivilities: when did you come to this country? Where are you from? Where are you really from? Being ignored or talked over in meetings, or making an assumption that a certain member of staff is going to make the drinks or take the notes, and things like that. Being ignored or talked over. Assumptions being made about your status in the organisation, so similar to the example that I shared before around a colleague at an education institution, and they were always mistaken for a student because of their sort of outward appearance. Specifying a gender when it's not necessary, saying to somebody that they have a lot of energy for their age, they're too young, they won't remember something, you don't look disabled, mispronouncing someone's name is another one, even when you're corrected, or saying to somebody, can I call you Kate because your name's too difficult to pronounce. So these are all examples of things that can often not be intended to cause any sort of offence, but do signal to somebody that you know, there is an element of difference about them that kind of instantly makes them feel like they're not part of the norm, or they're not welcome, or there's something about them that, you know, doesn't quite fit in. In terms of the impacts of those, so there's just a couple of examples on the screen there. So the body can sometimes react in the same way as it does to biological stresses. There is a cumulative impact on physical health, well-being and mental health. A feeling of demotivation, disinterest, lack of confidence and resignation. I often refer to micro-incivilities and microaggressions as being death by 1,000 paper cuts. You know, that there is definitely that cumulative impact of being in an environment where you might constantly be faced with, you know, words or questions or things that kind of make you think, you know, why am I being asked these things, or why am I being told these things, or asked to do these things? And I think it's really important at this point to kind of say that if somebody's curious about someone's background, or, you know, their kind of experiences, then it's absolutely fine to ask, but just make sure it's done in a respectful way. And something that I always say to everyone on every single training session, regardless of the topic, is be open to correction. So I work in this field and I still get it wrong on some occasions, whether it's how I refer to somebody, or how I pronounce somebody's name, or making an assumption about, you know, someone's involvement in something, and all they have to do is correct me, and I'm like, you just have to sort of apologise and take that feedback on, rather than becoming instantly defensive, which seems to be the natural reaction in some instances. And then the last kind of topic, I guess, that I want to talk you through and maybe introduce you to, if it's not something that you've come across before, is allyship. So to try and think now about how everyone as individuals can make a change and make an impact and do something that will help to create that level playing field for people, is to use any kind of power, privilege, influence that you have to take steps to do things with people that might be at disadvantage or might have a barrier or something up to prevent them from having access to something. So with allyship, most of us probably understand that acting as an ally is important in making people with different or traditionally marginalised identities feel included and supported, but it's also important to see that allyship is a powerful force for good. It's not just about your individual actions. There is research out there that shows that allies don't just influence one person at a time, they tend to inspire others to act as sort of allies too. So it kind of helps to create a culture of acceptance and support. So our allyship does have the power to help to create positive actions around EDI. And all it takes is for someone to stand up and start doing the right thing, and hopefully others will see that and follow. Thinking in kind of practical terms, in terms of what people can do to start demonstrating allyship and look at the actions that we can take. There's three sort of levels to look at it. There's individual actions, so how we act, how we can educate ourselves, how we can model inclusive behaviour, or work to change our mindset, be aware of bias and mitigate against them and that sort of thing. There's an interpersonal allyship angle as well, so the actions that you might take to support bring issues to the surface or push for change through day-to-day interactions with others. And then there's a structural level to it, so looking at things like policies, systems, processes, and seeing if there's a way of building actions and considerations into that can help practice allyship to sort of drive changes at an organisational level, from the perspective of, you know, the rules people follow, the policies in place and that sort of thing. And then in terms of how you can then put that into practice, so there's everyday interactions, so the day-to-day conversations that you have, the dynamics in meetings, the sort of water cooler conversations that you have. Obviously, there is a hybrid working element to the working world right now, so you know, there might be other ways in which that can be demonstrated. There's looking at things like workplace norms and expectations, so the systems that are used, the physical workspaces, the hours that you're expected to work and that sort of thing. And another one that's sort of worth considering here is things like socials and, you know, what kind of social events an organisation is putting on. Mentorship and sponsorship, you know, having the ability for people to access mentors, whether that's senior leaders, somebody that's from the same sort of background as them that's in a senior position that they can learn from and sort of have as a bit of a role model. But also reverse mentoring, so there may be somebody who is in a senior position that may not necessarily have faced a lot of barriers and sort of adversities in relation to EDI, doesn't invalidate the other barriers and challenges that they may face, but from an EDI perspective in particular, they may not have experienced anything, so they may not be aware of what those challenges might be, but giving them the opportunity to be reverse mentored by somebody who perhaps has, might help to open up their sort of awareness of things and, you know, where things may potentially need to change to then allow for more inclusion and diversity. Advancement and recognition, so making sure that people are recognised for their ideas and contributions or opportunities. So if you're in a meeting and somebody is constantly being spoken over, if there's a way that you can, you know, bring them into the conversation and sort of get them involved, then that's something to definitely do if you can. And then the last one is hiring, so experiences in applying or interviewing for jobs, you know, looking at that process end to end and seeing where bias may be playing a part in decisions and where that can be mitigated. So why is any of this important? So the last couple of slides just give a little bit of context. So a VUC, a world, this might be something that you've come across before, but we essentially live in a world that's very volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. That's the world we live in today. There's always something happening, things changing, things going on. So it's really important to see how that might be impacting different people and how that might need to be incorporated into processes and policies and just everyday discussions. As I mentioned before, there is a legal framework with regards to the Equality Act, but also things like pay gap reporting, which I know is a legislation for gender, but I think it's only a matter of time before there's other pay gap reports needed, whether that's disability, race, etc. And there's also a perception in the sense of there's some research that I've seen recently around people who are looking for work, so people who are entering the job market. They're actually doing a lot more research on an organisation about their commitment to EDI, what policies they have got in place, do they have staff support groups and things like that. And they're considering all of that before even applying for a role. So there is definitely an element of sort of being aware of what's being put out there for any organisation. And then also just to kind of finish on the benefits of EDI. So there's research to show increased productivity, better problem solving, drives profitability, drives innovation, enhances reputation, which is related to the recruitment point that I made, unearths a larger talent pool, you're more representative of patients and service users, both boosts employee morale and engagement, and it improves employee retention. So, you know, there's massive benefit, and this is at an organisation level, but there's also a massive individual benefit as well. So this was a really quick whistle-stop tour of some of the sort of concepts relating to EDI. So thank you for listening. And I know we've just hit 1 o'clock, but I am sticking around if anyone has got any questions. And I know that there's a feedback form that's on screen now, if anyone does want to share any thoughts. And
that's lovely. Oh, sorry, Heena. I cut you straight off there. I'm really sorry. Thank you.
That's all right.
Just to let people know as well, there is a poll that I've just launched with a couple of very quick questions where we could capture what we can help with next. So please do let us know whether today's session's been useful, and if there's any aspects that you want to just kind of have a bit of a brain dump at the moment to let us know what you think. As Heena said, there is a link on screen now with a QR code to a Microsoft Forms evaluation survey, which would be superb if you could complete, please, because it gives us some strong direction on where we need to go next. Sue, seeing as we are sharing the room.
Yeah, we're together on my camera.
There we go.
Yeah, so luckily we do have a head of digital education who could come to my rescue today, so thank you for doing that. So if you could do the survey, that would be amazing. We've got other support hubs coming up that people are going to be able to come along to as well. If you do tell us if you want more resources around EDI, please do let us know, and we'll see if we can get all of that organised. We'll send out a video, we'll send a link to a video when it's ready, the slides from today. And if you highlight to us any questions you'd like us to answer, we can do that as frequently asked questions. So please do add anything into the poll that Jim's put on and or the follow-up survey. And if there's anything you'd like more information on or you want more help with, then please let us know. I can see Eva has got a hand up. We can unmute you, Eva, if you wanted to ask anything in particular straight away. Can you unmute your mic, Eva? We've asked you to unmute. Can you unmute it?
Eva's maybe had to leave.
Yeah. No. No. Oh,
Eva.
Hi, Eva.
Sorry, that was me.
Oh, was it you, Tahmina?
Yeah.
It was
Eva's still muted, but there is a question in the Q&A. That's Eva's just said it was a mistake.
It was a rogue hand.
Okay.
It was a rogue hand. If anyone does have time and can stay for a couple of minutes, if you do have a burning question, we can do that if you would like to. If you'd rather just pop them into the survey, that's absolutely fine. But we'll stay on for another couple of minutes if anybody does.
Yeah, so there was a question, Sue. It's been waiting for a while, just while we've been presenting, from Bavin, who's said that the Notts and Derby East Midlands branch, they recently set up the essay competition, you know, around EDI. It was a prize, which was a funded day at the IBMS Congress. Bavin's just said that the interest in the competition was quite low, and the feedback that they got from the members was that they would have preferred a more relevant essay, which isn't focusing on EDI. So Bavin's question is there a general EDI problem in the profession? And does the Institute hold any generalised or anonymised case studies where an EDI issue might have impacted someone in a professional capacity?
Yeah, the short answer to that, Bavin, is no. Hi, Bavin, by the way, and I met Bavin last week. Yeah, the reason that the essay was EDI focused is because that new branch is being launched, and we thought that might be a nice thing to use, and Colin is involved in that, so that's why the essay was EDI focused. I'm sorry it didn't land very well if people didn't think that they had capacity to write an essay, but we do think it's an important topic for people to discuss, so maybe it could be a different format. About case studies and generalised or anonymous or otherwise, because we're not allowed to collect the data at the moment, we don't have permission to collect and hold data. We can't ask for that at the moment. If anybody did want to give us an anonymised case study, then that would be really useful. But at the moment, I can't ask about anyone's protected characteristics in order to then follow up and ask them to write me something. So I'm a little bit stuck at the moment because we don't have the things that we need in place at the Institute to be able to action that. But it is something we talked about, isn't it, Tahmina? As we've talked about things for the Biomedical Scientists magazine going forwards, we are really keen that we get case studies and information, and this happened to me, or this is what I did about it, and all of those kind of things. So if you have any contacts, Bavin, or if you want to drop me an email, because I know you've got my contact email address, just get in touch if you've got any ideas about how we could take it forward, or specific things that you'd like us to address, and then we can have a look at how we might action that. So more than happy to do it, but at the moment I can't have those details unless someone volunteers to do it. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Sue. We do have a question from someone else who's asking, how do existing staff with 30 years of experience show compliance? I think this is referring to, the new HCPC standards.
So again, it's going to be looking at the standards. So we did release a link. It's on. I can circulate the link again with the information from today, where we've mapped the standards to the new sections and modules. It's no surprise the EDI ones are in the EDI section, so that section is just a little bit bigger. The standards themselves are fairly straightforward, and it is about demonstrating that you do those things. So it would be something, if you were audited by the HCPC as a registered practitioner, you would be able to evidence that not only have you gone on a mandatory training course, but in your actions, people have observed you doing things. So if you're thinking about a trainee or thinking about your own CPD, I think it would be about having feedback from someone that they've seen that you have done that. So some of the things that Heena's mentioned about being an ally, being aware, understanding there are differences and addressing them. So it doesn't have to be a massive thing that you do. You don't need to set up any particular societies or anything like that. In your everyday work, are you aware of people around you? And are you aware there are differences? And do you actively try to address them? If you can say yes to that, you're going to hit most of those standards. And that could be service user, it could be colleagues, it could be patients, it could be any of the above, I think. How can EDI be evidence for the registration portfolio? So it is in there already, it's in the current version. So if you speak to your training officer, or if you are a training officer, look at your training plan about what you do at the moment, it's going to be about expanding that out. So I would suggest you look at the standard wording that's changed and the new standards that have come in compared to the current training plan that your laboratory will have, and look at where the gaps are. So most people at the moment for the portfolio as it currently is will say, I attended a training course, here's a witness statement, and here's something that I might have done. So we're looking at strengthening that. So it's about what you do, not I went to something and I sat and I listened and here are some slides. It's about how you actually embed that in what you do in your working life. So we will be giving some resources. We know that it's an area people are slightly worried about when it comes to evidencing. So part of the resource pack that I want to get together for the launch of the new portfolio is around good evidence for different sections and what kind of things people might want to use. So watch this space. We will come to experienced trainers and say, what do you do already? But it's building on the expertise people already have. So it's not new, it's just a bigger component. So hopefully that reassures people.